had what's called forward operating bases. So in a forward operating base, like those Beaugest forts, say 100, company strength, about 100 people would normally be there, of whom 5 to 10 maybe maximum would be women. And this is with, you know, very tough units like the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, 5 Scots or 2 Para, units that at the moment are banned from having women as part of their formal complement. In those environments, there is no space. There are only 2 showers. You're not going to have 1 shower just for the girls and then have everybody queuing. So you come and go, and you come and go with a little towel wrapped around you backwards and forwards to the shower. And when you're working in that environment, and people are being, and these are people who celebrate the fact, they call themselves wretches. I mean, these people will do stuff that I can't possibly tell you in public, in nightclubs, just to shock other people. They're great fun, but they like to be a bit wrong. Even in that environment, I never heard a single sexist comment. I never saw any, and I never really saw any flirting. There clearly were relationships sometimes further back from the front line, and inevitably, then people are sneaking off and doing what grown-up adults like to do. And it didn't seem to be a big problem. I mean, there was one case in the 6 months I was in Camp Bastion in which a woman fell pregnant or was pregnant before she deployed. And that was just dealt with as part of the normal run of life. I mean, you can go nuts over these things, or you can actually just approach it as a mature adult. And that's what people did in the field.
Pregnancy aside, how does this compare to the debate, which no longer exists, about gay men being in the armed forces? The traditional regressive argument that it would be a distraction and it'd be inappropriate and there would be sexual problems. Nobody credible ever makes that point anymore. It's just assumed that even if there are gay men with straight men in the armed forces, that they will organise themselves in a way that's respectful and that they'll manage their relationships in a way that doesn't disrupt their work.
Yeah, and in the experience I had, and this is probably something to do with how far we've moved as a society, but in this sort of uber-macho environment of 2 Para or whatever it is, you'd never hear a homophobic comment because you wouldn't know who was gay and who was straight, and several of them were quite happy to exhibit gay behaviour just because they thought it might be funny or part of the fun and games. There was a very, very kind of 21st century approach, frankly. It was just wasn't a thing. I mean, people might call each other gay as a sort of vague insult, but what they mean is that just being a bit wet. But it was extraordinary in that context, how far it had moved.
So if the objection about sexual temptation has gone away, it's been disproved in reality and practice, and so much of the army is already integrated with women in it, then I guess you're just left with this, I think, regressive idea about gender and the argument that being in active combat involves aggression and ferocity and a killer instinct is always the phrase that's used, which doesn't come naturally. Either it doesn't come naturally to women, or it's not something that should be encouraged in women, and therefore it's kind of against nature to allow women in active combat, which to me seems an incredible argument for anybody to make with a straight face.
Oh, good. I'm glad you weren't making the argument.
Of course I'm not. But the reservation I have when I hear that is that it doesn't feel ideal to me to encourage anyone in our society to develop that kind of behaviour. And that's why we have so many problems with people who have been in active combat trying to reintegrate into normal life. I mean, they form a hugely disproportionate number of criminal cases. They're overrepresented in domestic violence and drug abuse. There's PTSD. I feel like it's another reminder that we should kind of ask ourselves what kind of people we expect our soldiers to become. Whether they're male or female, that's problematic. Right.
The kind of people we expect our soldiers to become are kind of merciless killers with a brain. That's what you are. You're not recruiting for paramedics. You're recruiting to somebody who, without the slightest hesitation, will cause somebody else's head to explode at close range. That is the job of a frontline soldier, to run them through with cold steel at this distance between you and I. Now, there certainly are women capable of doing that, because I've been in combat with them. In every patrol I was in Afghanistan, there were at least one woman present, sometimes in a leadership role. Do you think
anyone, or do you come across anyone who's seriously making the argument that women aren't capable of that kind of behaviour, or that they shouldn't be encouraged to exhibit it because they're women rather than because it's inherently problematic?
No, I've never heard that. The only argument you hear against women in the frontline roles in the military is either the issue about discipline and sexual tension and that kind of stuff, which I think is nonsense, since it's been proven in combat, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, over a very sustained period of time, in which the presence of women right on the front line is not inimical to good discipline. So I think that's a nonsense argument. Whoever makes it, they just haven't been there. And that does tend to be, there are an awful lot of armchair officers, if you like, who gob off about this stuff and who have no experience of what it really means. There is, I think, a perfectly sound argument about physical capability, but I don't think that should be spread out across all women.
OK, let's talk about that, because there are biological differences between the genders.
There are?
Even though there are women who are stronger than the average man. And I'm sure there are male soldiers who aren't in... Not saying anything, Sam. How much did you squat this week? There are male soldiers who I'm sure aren't at the same physical peak that they would be expected to be all the time. People must fall
We just
below
don't get
and
into
above
you won't be able to remain in a frontline unit, in a frontline role, unless you meet certain basic athletic standards.
So those basic athletic standards... Are you saying that women aren't capable of meeting them?
They're different. At the moment, they're different from men and women. So the combat fitness, I can't remember the exact statistics, but you can be combat fit as a woman, but you won't have to carry the same amount of weight over the same distance in the same period of time. So this is being used as an argument for saying, therefore, women should not be in frontline combat roles, and certainly, and they won't get through.
Are these objective standards? Because, OK, the fastest man runs faster than the fastest woman. But a woman who is at her relative fitness peak, or the highest level of fitness for a woman, arguably has as much endurance, stamina and strength as a man who is at the same level of fitness within the range for a man. Yeah,
so that's fine if you're doing athletic pursuits, but war is not a sport. It's about being overwhelmed or overwhelming. So if you've got half women and half men in your unit and you're facing the same number of enormous Russians, you know, which unit would you rather be in? You know, the one that has a relative sense of capability, or the one with an absolute sense of capability?
Yeah, but what are the actual physical limitations that would mean a woman faced with those massive Russians? Interesting you chose that as an example, by the way.
Well, no, it's very likely, because you can't carry as much weight. You can't carry as many machine gun bullets. You're not as useful next to me as my buddy unless you can carry 200 rounds. If you only can carry 100 rounds, that leaves me 100 rounds short. And I'm going to get shot by the other guys. You know, it is an absolute thing. But, and this is where I think that there need not be this absolute ban on women, and I think that's why the Prime Minister is sort of trying to manoeuvre the military, excuse the pun, into a position where they don't have this absolute moratorium on women, is that if you are capable of passing the male standards for those units, then you should have every right to be exploited by those units as another body to throw at the enemy. That doesn't make any sense to me, to exclude women from combat. But at the end of the day, would you, as a woman who would presumably eventually be allowed to serve in a frontline combat unit, be prepared to put your name down for conscription?
But that is the essential point. And, you know, I was in Bournemouth last summer, where they have the air show every summer, and there's an incredibly aggressive propagandist recruitment drive that goes on at the same time, which I didn't know anything about before I went there, for the armed forces. And it's an area with a very poor white working class population. There are a lot of 16, 17-year-olds who haven't done well at school, have very limited job prospects, and you can see that this is aimed directly at them. And to me, that feels problematic. It's like you're exploiting people who don't have very many opportunities to become potentially cannon fodder at an age when they can't necessarily make the most informed choices about such serious lifelong decisions. They can't vote.
All right, I don't want to be... I'm not a propagandist. I'm not a...